James Webb Space Telescope spotted a large object about 10 light-years away moving toward Earth. Something strange is happening in the deep silence beyond our planets. The James Webb Telescope has detected an unexpected burst of internal activity inside the wandering object known as 3I-ATLAS. For years, it drifted like a frozen traveler in the dark. But now it looks alive. Its glow shifts, its shape changes, and its path is moving toward us. No one understands what is waking inside it. Yet the signs keep growing stronger, raising a fear that we can no longer ignore. The first sign of movement in 3I-ATLAS. When James Webb noticed the faint change inside 3I-ATLAS, it broke every idea scientists had about this quiet traveler. For a long time, 3I-ATLAS was seen as nothing more than a piece of frozen matter drifting through deep space. It showed no heat, no pressure, no internal chain. But then a soft rising pulse appeared inside it, almost like something shifting under its surface. This tiny flicker was not random. It repeated with a pattern that made experts uneasy because patterns mean activity and activity means a possible source. As Webb kept watching, this pulse grew clearer, stretching across the core of 3I-ATLAS like a heartbeat rising from a long sleep. Its outer layer started to reflect faint variations, showing that something inside was pushing outward. Even its tail changed direction slightly, giving the sense that its behavior was no longer passive. What made this moment more unsettling was how close 3I-ATLAS was drifting toward our region of space. This was not just an object waking up. It was an object waking up while moving toward us. The discovery forced researchers to track every shift because if internal movement continued, it could change its speed and path. The idea that something inside 3I-ATLAS was stirring created a tension that spread through every monitoring team. They had no clear model to understand it. They had no past event to compare it with. All they saw was a distant wanderer starting to behave in a way that did not match a normal interstellar object. The fear was simple. If this activity kept rising, no one knew what it would do next. A heat signature that should not exist. The next shock came when James Webb detected a thin line of heat inside 3I-ATLAS. This object was supposed to be cold to the core. It had spent ages drifting through deep space, far from any star. There was no reason for warmth, no place for energy to build up naturally. Yet, the readings showed a slow rising temperature hidden under its frozen layers. It was not enough to melt anything, but it was enough to prove that something inside was changing on its own. The heat was concentrated in one region, almost like a pocket of trapped motion. As the telescope kept watching, the zone expanded and shifted its shape, which meant the core of 3I-ATLAS was not stable anymore. Objects like this usually cool down and stay quiet. But 3I-ATLAS did the opposite. It warmed up while drifting toward us. That combination created a sense of unease because heat means reaction and reaction means force. Even a subtle force could alter its speed, making its approach faster or unpredictable. The steady temperature rise also showed that whatever was happening inside was not caused by sunlight or nearby stars. This was an internal activity. It came from the object itself. Researchers tried to compare it with past visitors like Oumuamua, but nothing matched. Oumuamua showed odd motion, but it never had a heat source inside. 3I-ATLAS changed the rulebook again by showing signs of internal life like energy that belonged to a system, not a simple rock. The more the heat moved, the more analysts feared that this was only the start. If the internal process grew stronger, it could force the entire structure to shift and bend, changing the way it traveled. For an object moving toward us, this made the situation more serious than anyone wanted to admit. Strange shape changes seen by James Webb. The next clue that something was wrong inside 3I-ATLAS came from its shape. At first, it looked like a stretched fragment of frozen dust drifting with no purpose. But once the internal heat appeared, the edges began shifting in small, uneven patterns. James Webb captured faint changes in its outline as if sections of its surface were tightening or relaxing. These were not normal cracks from sunlight or ice breaking. They were smooth, slow distortions, as if pressure from inside was pushing outward. Each shift lasted a few minutes before settling again, which made the entire object appear restless. The change was so subtle that older telescopes would have missed it, but Webb caught every curve becoming sharper, every ridge rising slightly as though something buried deep within was testing its limits. Objects like this do not usually reshape themselves without an external force, which raised even more questions about the true nature of 3I-ATLAS. The shape changes also made its movement harder to predict. When a body shifts even slightly, it can alter the way it spins, and that can change the way it travels. The biggest concern was that these distortions always happened when the internal heat rose, which proved the events were connected. Analysts started to model what might be causing the pressure inside. But every model failed because they all relied on known physics, and 3I-ATLAS was behaving like something outside the normal range. Even its tail responded by bending in new direction, as if gas or dust was being released in tiny bursts that were too weak to see directly but strong enough to affect motion. With every change, its path toward us became something that had to be monitored hour by hour. It was no longer a silent traveler. It was shifting, shaping, and responding from within. The unsettling shift in its trajectory. As the shape of 3I-ATLAS kept changing, scientists expected its motion to stay steady, but it did not. The next discovery was a slow shift in its path. It was not a violent turn or a sudden jump. It was a gentle drift bending closer toward our region of space. When the data was compared with older measurements, the change became clear. The object was no longer following the exact line it entered with. Something inside was altering its momentum in tiny but consistent pushes. Normally, an interstellar object moves according to gravity alone. Yet 3I-ATLAS started moving as if a small force was guiding it. That force matched the moments its internal activity increased, which meant the movement was coming from the object itself. This was the same pattern seen without gassing, but no visible jets or plumes appeared around it. Everything was happening inside, and the result was a path slowly angling toward the inner system. The troubling part was that these shifts were too regular to be mistakes in observation. Each time its heat rose, its trajectory adjusted by a fraction, and these fractions added up. If it continued the same pattern, its future distance from Earth would shrink more than expected. The monitoring teams began updating prediction charts every few hours because the behavior kept evolving. Rare visitors are supposed to pass harmlessly by, but 3I-ATLAS was acting like it had some form of internal push guiding it forward. The fear was not that it would collide with Earth, but that it was moving with intention when no interstellar object should act that way. A traveler from deep space showing signs of choosing its direction created a new kind of uncertainty. No one could explain the core, but everyone understood that this change made the situation far more serious. A pulse inside the core that keeps growing. The most disturbing discovery came when James Webb picked up a repeating pulse inside the core of 3I-ATLAS. It was faint at first, like a soft rise and fall hidden under heavy layers of ice and dust. But as days passed, the rhythm grew stronger and clearer. It did not match any natural vibration expected from a frozen interstellar object. It behaved like a pattern rising from an inner source that refused to stay quiet. The pulse spread through the core in waves that shifted its brightness in slow cycles. These cycles lined up perfectly with the moments when its heat signature climbed and its shape changed, which proved that everything was linked to one engine buried inside. Nothing about this object suggested it should have an engine or a process capable of this kind of repeated energy. Yet, the pulse kept rising as if the core was waking step by step. The readings also showed that the rhythm was not shrinking. It was expanding outward, making the outer layers flex in tiny motion, visible only through Webb's sensitivity. Even with no sound in space, the pulse created a sense of pressure, almost like a heartbeat echoing through a cold shell. Analysts tried to match it with chemical reactions, but the timing was too regular and too controlled. The wave intervals stayed locked, which made it feel more like a system than a random release. As the pulse grew stronger, the risk grew with it because the internal pressure could cause the object to break or shed material in any direction while moving toward us. A sudden release could change its speed and shift its track sharply. Worse was the feeling that this pulse was not slowing down. It was rising in strength as 3I-ATLAS drifted closer, as if proximity to the sun or another influence was feeding the activity inside it. The more it pulsed, the more the object behaved like something preparing for a larger change. Unexplained light patterns reflecting from its surface. As the pulse inside 3I-ATLAS grew stronger, the James Webb Telescope began noticing something even stranger. Thin ripples of light started reflecting from its surface in shifting patterns. These were not normal sunlight reflections. They moved too smoothly, too deliberately, almost like signals passing across an uneven shell. The patches brightened and dimmed in slow transitions that matched the internal pulse, proving the light patterns were reacting to whatever was happening inside. Every time the core expanded, the surface glowed in a new shape, then faded again in a rhythm that felt too organized for a frozen interstellar fragment. The surface was covered with dust and ice. Yet the way it reflected light suggested movement beneath it. The outer shell bent in tiny waves, creating bright streaks that crawled across its form like rising sparks. Analysts tried comparing the behavior to known space objects, but nothing matched. Even comet surfaces, which sometimes brighten during outgassing, do not create smooth repeating patterns like this. These light waves looked control, almost like something inside was pressing against the crust in a slow attempt to push through. The most unsettling part was that these ripples increased in number as 3I-ATLAS drifted closer to our region. It felt as if distance mattered, as if its internal activity was responding to something ahead. The glow also traveled around the object in loops, forming circles that never looked random. Each loop matched the timing of its heat rise and its strange shape changes. That level of coordination made researchers wonder if the activity inside was part of a process rather than a chaotic event. Dust trails that move against expected physics. The next surprise came from the faint dust trail stretching behind 3I-ATLAS. At first, it looked like a normal debris path, the kind produced by icy objects shedding tiny particles as they travel. Please like and subscribe channel.